good afternoon to everyone. It's great to be here today. Let me call the participants of the next panel, which is about IPO, a subject which is becoming interesting, I think, for most of the entrepreneurs here. So first of all, please welcome from Windeln.com, Laura SCHULTE. And from EnterNext, CEO of Chairman, Eric Forest. And the Deputy CEO of Orange, Pierre, LOUETTE. Thank you to all of you to be here today. I'd like to start maybe with, as we're talking about IPO, I'll talk to Laura first. You went public on May the 6th, so you made it. So what was that like? I mean, what was good and more difficult?
It's a very big project, and that's a huge understatement. We did have our IPO on May 6th. It was months and months of work on top of years of work. And we had a successful IPO, and we're now moving forward with the capital that we were able to bring out of that. It's fun, we're expanding, and the company is also recovering. It's now picking back up and focusing on the business.
When you say that it's recovering, you mean that it's a major shock from from the organization standpoint? I mean,
a major shock? No, we knew going into it was going to be such a big project, but it does use quite a bit of capacity to make sure that you have all of the data you need, that you have, you're able to do the reporting. And that's capacity that is being taken away from other areas where you know you could be doing other projects.
Okay. Eric, maybe a quick word regarding this market, which seems to be taking some traction. So IPOs are coming at the end. I mean, is that complicated to do an IPO? I mean, tell us a bit more regarding what happens in France.
It's a long process, of course, but it's not so complicated. And you have to put in the balance the benefit of an IPO, of course. It's a question, of course, of preparation for an entrepreneur to be, I would say, to be ready and somewhere to enjoy the stock exchange, because you can't force anybody to join the stock exchange. So you have to see the advantages of an IPO for an entrepreneur before going through this process.
I mean, again, on Laura, just quickly, because you mentioned when we talk, for the founders of Windeln, the IPO was a real major achievement in terms of profile for the company, and they lived it as their big achievement. Tell us a bit more about that.
Well, we didn't see them for quite a while they were doing the road shows. They were absent quite a bit. But for them personally, yes, it's a huge achievement. As you say, it's not something that everyone gets to do, and they had built a business with that as a possibility in the strategy, and then to be able to complete it and have it go successfully is also a huge achievement.
Maybe quickly to Pierre. I mean, you are a stakeholder in this ecosystem when you're doing a lot of things. You are the first telco operator in France. You have accelerators. You are very much engaged in the ecosystem. You are an investor, either directly and indirectly. So tell us maybe a bit more regarding what is the strategy of Orange vis-à-vis this ecosystem.
So the strategy goes back to what the company is actually. So we have a long history for research, a lot of R&D that we do internally, and also a long-standing tradition of corporate venture. So there was a tradition of Innovacom previously with 6 different funds. And more recently, we moved to another fund called Iris, which we have launched with Publicis. So the two groups, they put together each of 75 million euros to create that fund. And even more recently, we have added, you're turning all the time, so I have to follow you.
Yes, absolutely.
It's part of the exercise. So we have added new envelopes that we can spend. One thing called Orange Digital Venture, which is an internal structure. So it's very easy for us to invest quickly in early stage companies. And we're also part of different specialized funds like Robolution or Eco-Mobility.
Yeah.
So we try to cover all the different themes that Orange is involved in.
And I mean, this is interesting because we see more and more corporates now looking at the ecosystem. And one way of actually looking and exchanging with the ecosystem is actually through investments in funds and be involved more in the ecosystem. I mean, do you think you had a benefit in terms of culture regarding innovation? Has it helped the group to actually understand a bit better innovation and looking at it?
Yeah, first of all, it's a driver for a sort of competition, if you want, or complementarity also between the internal forces and what happens outside. So we have all of those people, 4,000 people in the company do research and marketing and research. So it's a lot. We have a lot of patents that we run, that we create. So this is internal, but it's important also to open your eyes and look at other companies. One of the things that we try to do, and we just recently done it with the Orange Digital Ventures, is try to invest in areas where we are not very expert, or even try to invest in companies that might become competitors of ours in the future. Okay. So this is what we're looking at. Okay.
Maybe back to Laura quite quickly. I mean, you're now public. I mean, you've been public for 6 months now, or more or less, a bit more, a bit less. So, I mean, what changes? I mean, I know, but we are an investor for the records in the company. You have an international expansion plan, very important, which you intend to execute with the money you raised.
Yes.
So, I mean, has it changed also vis-a-vis, I mean, the rest of the people you are interacting as a company, the fact of being public?
Yes, definitely. If it affects our customers directly, do they think about that when they're placing an order? I don't think so. I don't really know. But I do know the reaction from my suppliers, from potential service providers, from people bringing us solutions. We definitely have a different kind of recognition now.
Yeah.
And that means I, in turn, can bring a different offer, a better offer to my customers.
Okay. And I mean, the fact of becoming more transparent, which is, Eric, maybe, which is an issue, which is kind of creates fear in the mind of an entrepreneur. I mean, was that an issue? Do you feel
I feel like
it's
we have
an
to
issue?
be less transparent.
So, I mean, many companies, yes, true, digital companies tend to really put the accent on the fact they are transparent and for the customer, but
right.
It's not an issue for the majority of innovative and tech companies. Maybe it's much more an issue for, I would say, traditional economy or much more mature companies. But through discussions we had with a lot of entrepreneurs in tech sectors, transparency is not the major issue, definitively.
And just on that note, I mean, internally, we're a company that we like to share the business with everyone who's involved so they can see the vision. And we're very numbers driven. And just after an IPO, you have to consider what's publicly available. And so that's the kind of, that's the change. You have to be careful that what's known is known to everyone at the same time.
Yeah, maybe on the issue of transparency and IPOs, I think you need to look at a situation in which any company starting hopes that on the way, somewhere on the way, IPO could be an option, could be a possibility. Yes. And as you were pointing out when we were preparing the conversation, you said you need to be good with your accountings, transparent, ready to be transparent from the day one. It's not like if you were supposed to invent something and then come up with a new story for the IPO. You need to be ready from day one, because if it happens, if the IPO along the way becomes a good option, then you really want to be transparent. Because what happens is people are going to look under the hood, and they're going to really look at the engine, what's in the engine, how is it built, what are your real numbers, and so on and so forth. So you need to be ready for that examination.
Okay.
Well, and that's often very difficult, I think, for entrepreneurs. When I look around at this group here, you have your vision, you want to go with it, you're moving fast, and it's often very difficult to make sure that you track what you're doing. It's often for many people a trade-off. It might not be their area of strength. But it is important. It helps with the IPO.
Readiness is definitely the key word for an IPO. Readiness of entrepreneur, you have to prepare your IPO. Yeah. And I think there's still some education to provide to young entrepreneurs to be better prepared to, I would say, to face the financial markets, a quite different world. They don't know this world. So we have to help them to better understand and be well prepared. But there's also a question of, I would say, preparation and education of the ecosystem, meaning investors. Many of them are not yet understanding these new disruptive business models of these young and high-growth companies. So it is also our role to prepare investors and to allow them to meet with these young companies before IPOs, before the markets, but just to be able to understand what are the trends of these new businesses and what are these companies they will meet for an IPO maybe 1, 2, or 3 years later.
Yeah.
It can be contagious as well. When you start hearing what's going on with other companies, I think my experience in the Silicon Valley is you hear behind you, hey, they're doing a deal. Hey, they've got an idea. They found an investor. And when you have that around you, then you start to realize it could be possible for your company as well.
Yeah. Maybe one quick word regarding your specific case, because these are things that happen. You got introduced in May, then the market made a correction, then China had some problems. At the end of the day, despite the fact that the company is doing pretty well, slightly above budget, the stock went down 35%. So,
yes.
So what was the? Well, people are more concerned even in the company. So what?
Well, when you do an IPO, or when you're thinking about, do you have a company that's a candidate for an IPO? What your investors are going to be looking for is, do you have a predictable business?
Of course.
Because an investor doesn't want risk, they want predictability. And yet when you enter the market, there's an awful lot of things you can't control anymore, you can't predict them. And so that's one aspect of doing an IPO. You enter a market, it fluctuates.
Maybe one quick question to Pierre regarding, you have a certain number of investments, directly and indirectly. So do you feel now French entrepreneurs start seriously looking at IPOs? Or, in my personal experience, I have the impression there is still a lot of skepticism. So the idea is that, IPO is, you have to show a lot of things, there are a lot of constraints, and the end game is not that clear. Are you exiting the company? Are you exiting certain shareholders? What do you see in your portfolios? If you have some visibility regarding this.
Well, from our portfolio, there are several options. Again, as we mentioned, I hope that all of the entrepreneurs here will have this option and this problem of considering an IPO. It's a good problem to have. Then you don't have to go for an IPO. You can choose different ways. You can find private placements. You can find money. There's a lot of money to be found in Europe, actually, that is ready to be invested. From the IPO world, we hear that there are about 30 to 35 IPOs that could be considered in the next, weeks or months in Europe, and some of them in France, as our colleague knows. So it's a possibility. A lot of it depends on the markets, but it's not the only possibility. There are many examples of companies. I'm thinking of BlaBlaCar, for instance. I'm thinking of Dailymotion, on the other hand. I was in charge of Dailymotion within the group for many years, and we sold a lot of the equity to another industrial group, which is going to take the company even further on. So it's not the only path to growth. It's not the only path to success. It's also a costly, difficult experience. Okay, you can raise money instantly, and then you can see what you do with it, but it's not the only way to success. So it's one of the options that are to be considered.
It's compact, though. You can continue to do funding rounds, one after another, Series A, B, C, and keep going, or you can look forward to when does it make sense to do an IPO, because then you have a compact funding round. Yes, it's difficult. Yes, you probably get less sleep than you were before, and that probably wasn't a lot before then. But it's done, and then you can use the capital that you've been able to raise, and focus on your business.
Yeah, maybe
IPO is one way. You're totally right. So at the end of the day, the choice will be in the hands of the company and its shareholders. But just, I would say, thanks to the new market environment, especially regarding tech companies since 2 years, I would just recommend to consider this option as another one, and not to focus only on one option. The company has to consider different ways. Even for the VCs or the PE funds, there are different ways for exit. IPO could be one efficient one.
Okay, maybe a final word regarding the future. So I'm looking at Eric. We have heard that there are some nice IPOs coming to the market. One is public, we have the right to mention. So Thierry...
You can ask Terry tonight because
Showroom Privé will be
be
public soon. I don't know where he is, but good. So do you really expect that these kind of deals might change the scenario for France? I mean, I think even if there are some promising signs that overall the IPO subject is a subject we've been talking not that much in the last 36 months in this ecosystem. So what's your take on that?
It will change. We had 12 digital listed companies since beginning of 2014. And you mentioned Showroom Privé, which will be the listing of a very successful, of course, digital company with a size higher than we had since many years. So I'm sure it will change, I would say, the feeling about markets, financial markets, and tech and innovative companies. And investors will follow. And not only investors, but I'm quite confident that some other tech companies are waiting for this kind of mid-sized deals to enter also the market. So cross fingers, of course, but things are moving very fast in France and in Europe, not only in France. And just to give you a final word about this, about the future, we have a very good example which should become a benchmark with the life sciences sector. In less than 10 years, our markets have become the second market in the world for life sciences companies. So we can do exactly the same for the digital companies.
So we will see you in 12 months and you will show us whether the digital market is becoming #1 in Europe.
With pleasure.
At least. Okay. Pierre, Laura, Eric, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.